Hola, hola, hola. Hello and welcome. Welcome to my vet journey by Dr. Melissa Judah. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Comenzamos! Hello, this is Melissa one more time. Today we have a special guest. He is a foreign veterinarian just like us, and he's going to be sharing his experience and his journey in getting his license in the United States. So, could you start by introducing yourself and your background in veterinary medicine?
Thank you, Dr. Melissa. Absolutely. My name is Dr. Joseph Desa. I am a veterinarian here in the Highland Park, Illinois area, which is a north suburb of the Chicago area. I am a partner in a practice called Pets for Life. I also am a partner in a pharmaceutical company in the Dominican Republic called Ramvet. In terms of my background, I've been in the veterinary field for over 20 years. It all started when I was a volunteer in the local vet hospital where my mother used to take our animals. And then I became a veterinary technician in the same practice where they offered me a job. I stayed there for a couple of years before I went to vet school. So I moved from Puerto Rico to the Dominican Republic.
Oh, wow.
And my graduate studies for veterinary school were done in the Universidad Nacional Pedro Enrique Ureñas. I finished in 2012 when I completed my thesis in comparing variables associated to canine hypertension
Mhm.
in dogs. And then shortly after that, I moved to the Chicago area where I continued my veterinary journey. And at that point, I got a job as a veterinary technician shortly after moving into the summer of 2012. Multiple jobs, actually, various veterinary hospitals where I was working, where I was introduced to really what it meant to be an employee at a hospital in the United States. It
Mhm.
was quite the transition period for me. I mean, I knew veterinary medicine in Puerto Rico, I knew veterinary medicine in the Dominican Republic, and I only dreamed about what veterinary medicine was until I was able to kind of see it on a day by day basis in the US. Um, Now, when I was that type of employee, a veterinary technician, it not only allowed me to see the transition and how veterinary medicine was practiced in the United States, but it allowed me to start getting experience in the US, and it allowed me to start studying for my boards and starting the process. So, um, as you know, I selected the PAVE program to try to get licensed in the US.
Mhm.
The reason I did that was because the PAVE program was just a little bit more formal, a little bit more structure. It provided a clinical year. It provided the opportunity to understand what veterinary medicine was like in the US.
Mhm.
And, it was the lesser known entity. So most Caribbean kids like us
Yeah.
go the ECFVG for the most part. And I'm not sure if it was related to the fact that we grew up in the Caribbean and the environment and the weather, and most people want to go to Florida,
Mhm.
and that's what most people went. And back then, in 2012, PAVE did not accept Florida as a state to be licensed.
You decided to move to the United States, so maybe you knew that you were coming already. And then there's so many options that you can go through in order to validate like your license. But like what motivated you exactly to choose the PAVE?
Yeah, so the way that I looked at it, not only it was a formal program that had a clinical
Mhm.
year that allowed me to transition into being a veterinary professional in the United
Mhm.
States without having to jump into a clinical practice test
Mhm.
and having to find my own resources to be able to study for those.
True.
I decided to take a different route. Well, it wasn't easy. It was a little bit, it was a
Mhm.
challenge. Um, but in the end, I was really happy that I selected, like I said, a more formal approach
Mhm.
where I joined fourth year veterinary students to do a clinical year rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, I felt like I was a little bit more ready to go out in the real world as a professional as if I had studied in the US. Um, I did it a little bit differently. So, um, the PAVE program is known to be a program that students that go to St. Matthew's University, St. George's University, Ross University, because they have a relationship with veterinary schools in the US, they have their students go and do their clinical year
Mm-hmm.
at a fourth year university in the US because they don't have the facilities on site to have a clinical year.
Mm-hmm.
So every student that goes to those schools completes the PAVE program,
Mm-hmm.
and they are eligible to get a license because they completed the PAVE program. Now,
Okay.
students like us that went to a non-accredited school that did not have a relationship with schools in the US,
Mm-hmm.
then it was a little bit redundant because, as you know, we did a clinical year in the Dominican Republic, but
Mm-hmm.
then I had to repeat a clinical year in the US with the fourth
Sure.
year students.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
CFVG has these 4 steps that you need to complete besides taking the NAVLE and then taking the state examination. So for the ECFVG, you have the step 1, that is the registration, step 2, that is the English proficiency exam, step 3, which is the BCSE, which is the basic science examination, and then step 4, that is the 3-day rotation. It's the CPE. For with PAVE, like how does it differ from that? Like how many steps do you have to take? How many exams? Like how long does it last? And what's the price for it?
yeah, absolutely. So great question. My full journey was about 2 to 2 years and a half.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very similar structure to the ECFBG, and the ways that it differs is so graduating from a non-accredited school is like that first step. Then you
Mm-hmm.
go into the registration. That's very similar to the ECFBG. So you get your certification, your registration, the
Mm-hmm.
paperwork that it gets submitted to the program. That's all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to get, um, you know, proficient in an English-based test, particularly if you did not go to a high school in the United States. You have
Mm-hmm.
to take a TOEFL test, an English proficiency test, or a IELTS type of test.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all the same. And then there is a very similar step, which is a basic veterinary science test called a qualifying exam.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the equivalent of the basic veterinary exam in the ECFBG, but it's called the qualifying exam. I think the new name is the QSE. It
Mm-hmm.
used to be called the QE when I took it, but it encompasses the same type of topics. Um, biggest differences between that test and the ECFVG test that I never took myself,
Mm-hmm.
but from what I understand, you prepare for it in a very similar manner, and the topics are very similar, but the price was a little bit more expensive.
Okay.
So I don't know what the cost is for the basic veterinary test right now in the ECFVG
Mm-hmm.
AVMA program, but that test was $1,500 when I took it for the basic veterinary test.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then the requirement for the clinical year
Mm-hmm.
is that you have to pass that test, graduate, and get proficient on an English test before you do the clinical year.
Or is there like a limited amount of chances that you have to pass it?
You can take it more than one time. The only thing is that test, unless things have changed, they do only offer it 2 or 3 times in a year.
Okay.
So they are scheduled, and there are stages during the year or phases during the year that you can actually take it.
Okay, so once you have that done, then you can move to your clinical rotation year. So how does that work? Like what requirements do you need to have? Is there anything that you need to know beforehand? How do you prep for it? How do you get tested while you are like in your rotation year?
Great question. Yeah. So After I finished the qualifying exam, I
Mhm.
had some time to be able to, you know, contact different universities as to what the process was like. So I communicated myself with the University of Illinois, Champaign and Urbana,
Mhm.
and I had contact with them, and they were listed on the PAVE website as one of the universities that accepted students for their clinical year rotations.
Mhm.
Um, so I made the contact through them. They explained the process and the protocol, and there was a few requirements. So requirements were, you have to be graduated, you have to finish your English test. Um, the qualifying exam was not a requirement, but the PAVE program
Mhm.
does specifically state that if you take your clinical year and pass your clinical year before you've passed your qualifying exam, they will not count your clinical year as part of your steps to getting licensed. So that means that if you finish it
Mhm.
and you haven't passed your basic science test, then you would have to repeat your clinical year if you pass your basic science test after your clinical year.
Wow.
So I did it step by step, did the
Mhm.
qualifying exam, and then during the period of getting into the school, there was like a 3 to 6 month period. I went ahead and took my NAVLE test.
ECFVG allow us to take the NAVLE once we pass the step number 3, which is the BCSC, or you can take it once you're done. But with the PAVE, like, are you able to take it like when exactly?
Yeah, so there's different entities because it is based on regulations of the US
Mhm.
versus PAVE regulations or the University of Illinois regulations. So there's not like a restriction on when can you take it. So I decided to take it before my clinical year so I could get that out of the way.
Mhm.
But I was taking the clinical year with students that were part of the university that had not taken the NAVLE, and then I was also taking it with some other students from the islands that were doing their clinical year there that were going to take the NAVLE. So you could take the NAVLE while you're doing your rotations. You could take it after,
Mhm.
but you got to make sure that you do some of the other requirements before you get into that.
What were like the biggest like challenges that you face while in the PAVE?
Honestly, before getting into the PAVE, I feel like it was the biggest challenge. Um, Not the program, but the clinical year. And the reason is because the clinical year, the tuition, the charge for that, the billing for that is equivalent to an out of state student
Mhm.
for the university. So if a University of Illinois student was charged $25,000 for the year or $30,000
Mhm.
for the year, then an out of state student was charged $50,000 for the year. So honestly, it was the financial aspect and the economic aspect of being able to gather that money
Mhm.
was the most difficult for me. So I didn't have that kind of money laying around. And it was really difficult because I tried to get a loan from the bank.
Mhm.
I tried to get a student loan from Wells Fargo, et cetera. I was looking at my options, and I went through the process. I even got a cosigner to sign on the loan to increase the chances of my loan getting approved. But in the end, the bank would not loan you the money because the program that you were doing or the year that you were doing was not leading to a degree. So it is
Wow.
something that they did not provide you with a financial loan because, once again, you were not pursuing or obtaining a degree from the university, even though you were completing a program that would
Mhm.
allow you to become a doctor of veterinary medicine. So, in the end, I relied on 2 to 3 years of savings, of working as a veterinary technician, credit cards, and that was pretty much it. I have
Yeah.
also obviously you have to pay for rooming, and housing.
Yeah.
So that was around $500. I was able to get a room, um, near the university,
Yeah.
and those were really the biggest challenges. Once I was in the program, Honestly, it wasn't that difficult. I think it was a great experience. You would rotate every 2 weeks through different rotations. So you would do surgery, internal medicine, dermatology, electives or externships outside of the university, shelter medicine, anesthesia. You would be on call, you would do overnight shifts. So you were treated like a regular student.
Yeah.
And as part of that clinical year, you would also be tested like a regular student. So they would challenge you with assessments and tests that they would do to regular students that were outside of your rotations,
Hmm.
that were part of the assessment of your clinical year, such as, suturing or identifying nerves or anatomy
Hmm.
or, large animal, small animal, equine medicine, all that good stuff. So you would have some practical type of assessments
Hmm.
that were part of the clinical year, but were not necessarily part of your rotation.
You do not, complete your clinical year or you fail your clinical year. Do you have to pay all over again and do everything all over again?
Yeah, great question. So the university had some stipulations as to like if you failed a rotation, a 2 week rotation, there would be a certain amount of times that you would be eligible to redo it.
Okay.
Like at the end of your rotation or at the end of the year, you would be able to repeat it. There was a structure like if you didn't pass it 2 or 3 times, I think that they would kick you out. But I was blessed to never be in that opportunity in that situation.
Are there any like available resources? You know that the for the ECFVG, BCFC, and also like for the NAVLE, we have like VetPrep website. We also have like Suku Review. Are there any like online resources that you can use, or did you like only rely on books when taking your exams?
So I used a variety of things.
Mhm.
So one of the biggest resources that I had was my experience as a technician and being a veterinarian in a different country
Mhm.
and my experience in Puerto Rico. And like I said, working in multiple practices in the US, that experience was invaluable. Um, Also, in terms of what I was able to use, Zuku, just like it targets their prep reviews, they target it for the qualifying exam as well.
Okay.
Um, and then the vet prep as well, they target it as for your NAVLE and for
Mhm.
your qualifying exam as well. So you use some of the same resources, and I didn't really prepare for a clinical year. It was you going through rotations,
Mhm.
and you would have assignments. So you would study as you go. You would do medical records as you go. You would do assignments as you go.
Mhm.
So there wasn't much to study except for assessments that you would get during the rotation,
Mhm.
and obviously the assessments that you would get evaluated on throughout the year.
Do you have any advice for that student or that new graduate that's like out there in another country, want to come into the United States but have no clue what to do? Like, do you have any advice for that person, like maybe considering applying for PAVE in this case?
Yeah, so obviously I can only speak on my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of students that went through PAVE. I know a lot of students that went through ACFVG. So I'm talking about my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that helped me out the most was having relationships here in the United States, getting jobs at veterinary hospitals here in the United States, having a support system. Um, you know, the places where I was working as a technician were willing to support me, even financially, to complete the program. So you developing relationships, working relationships, and them seeing your how hard you want to work, how hard you want to be, how you want to be part of the practice and be
Mm-hmm.
licensed, then you will meet people along the way that care about you and will support you. So, one of the things that I think was the most invaluable and valuable was getting a job and getting trained
Mm-hmm.
before you actually go into a clinical year. before you take your NAVLE, before you take your qualifying exam. You have to actually live it
Mm-hmm.
on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, I can only remember taking that test, some of these tests, and some of the questions that I was seeing on the test was some of the appointments that I was seeing last week as a veterinary
Wow.
technician.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the biggest things. And honestly, having a job and saving money, no matter what route you take, is definitely a big, big part of the equation. Um, definitely, a lot of people take the ECFVG and they take, you know, the surgery aspect, and then they have to repeat that or anesthesia, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have to repay that. It's always a lot of money. So study hard, get a job in the field, and don't take any days off. You can do it by working. If I did it working 60 hours a week and studying for boards, honestly, anyone else could do it. And you know veterinarians in the United States typically come out with debt of over $200,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, over the 4-year period.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you get into debt for that last step of becoming a veterinarian, like that, the CPE test
Mm-hmm.
or the clinical year test, it is really nothing compared to what veterinarians in the United States come out with in terms of debt. They come out with $300,000 of debt.
Yeah.
So you have to look for a way to make it work, and you just have to dedicate yourself for try to do it. After a year or two, I mean, it's all really in your rear view mirror.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and share your valuable insights on the PAVE program. Your experience and perspective have been incredibly enlightening, and I'm sure our listeners will walk away with a much deeper understanding of the PAVE program and maybe, have more options to see what they do in order to validate their license in this country. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your journey with us. For our listeners, if you are interested in learning more about the PAVE program, or if you have any questions about the licensing process, please leave it in the comments below. Make sure you turn on the bell to receive notifications for new videos, and share, like, subscribe. We want to create a community to help each other. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to having you back with me in the next video.